On this week's Music Nerd, I'm sure you have heard something about this new iPhone 5 gizmo, but what you might have missed amongst all the commotion was that they also announced a brand new, sleeker, smoother, easier to use version of iTunes. The last year or so has seen the rise of the first few true threats to iTunes' dominance over the music player market, namely Spotify and YouTube's ever easier to use playlist feature. So I've been very curious as to if, when, and how iTunes might respond. During last week's big Apple announcement extravaganza, while it was overshadowed by the iPhone 5, Apple did announce a new revamped version of iTunes, and while its basic business model is the same, there are a few fairly significant changes that are pretty obvious attempts to maintain ground in the music player wars. So what's new? Well, first of all, iTunes will be laid out in a grid-type view where you can click once on songs or albums to get info about that song or album, and click twice to actually play it. And I think that this is pretty obviously in preparation for a future where there are fewer actual computers, fewer PCs, and more touchscreens, tablets. Boom. The next iTunes update will allow users to see both their music library and individual playlists at the same time, making it much easier to edit playlists. And I know that doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but I think it is a pretty big deal because Spotify and YouTube are almost entirely playlist-based. Playlists are much more important now in the music world than they were a year ago. Also, in the spirit of keeping up with Spotify, specifically Spotify's Q feature, iTunes now has an Up Next feature where you can see and easily rearrange what songs are going to be played up next. And finally, a cool new feature: when you're browsing the iTunes store for music from a particular artist, not only do you see that artist's work, you also see their upcoming tour dates. And I'm not sure if this affects iTunes' profit model at all. I don't know if they make a commission from tickets sold, but either way, neat. Now, all of these are smart changes, but iTunes' fundamental business model is still the same. Users pay for individual songs, at which point they can do whatever they want with them, which is distinct from YouTube and Spotify, which are free and ad-supported, but don't offer users any leeway in the way of controlling the files themselves. iTunes is still far and away the most profitable music player, and if they feel threatened by their competition, they are certainly not letting on. We'll know that their competition has made a real dent in iTunes' confidence if and when iTunes introduces some sort of a subscription streaming music service with access to everything, but you have to pay for it every week or month or something. Speaking of Spotify, they too have recently announced some changes, namely that they will be introducing a browser version of their service. There is a link below to a Gizmodo article speculating as to all the potential reasons as to why Spotify would want to launch a browser-based version, but the bottom line is, why the not? This helps them keep up with YouTube and Pandora, which obviously are primarily browser-based. It makes their music that much more shareable, and just generally opens up the door to more users who may or may not be comfortable downloading actual software to their PC, or don't have a smartphone, or whatever. Which company do you think will win the music player wars, and why? Leave a comment. In response to last week's Music Nerd all about Gangnam Style, username Drewski684 said, "This is even worse than that Soulja Boy Yule dance. Can you imagine how many Gangnam Style flash mobs this is going to create?" First of all, I think you mean you, not Yule. As far as I know, Crank That was not a Christmas carol. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. Second, how on earth would Gangnam Style flash mobs be a bad thing? That sounds to me like the opposite of a bad thing. That is to say, an awesome thing. The first one of you music nerds to organize and record a Gangnam Style flash mob with more than 20 people wins a cookie. That's a promise. Also, as you surely already know, we recently started a Music Nerd YouTube community playlist where you guys decide each week what music we add to it. And this week's highest rated suggestion comes from Johnny Dark in London, who said that we should add The Big Roar by The Joy Formidable. Roger that, Johnny from London. The Big Roar has been added. I'm excited to give it an in-depth listen. And if you want to give the Music Nerd YouTube playlist an in-depth listen, you can click right here or the link in the description. And if you have an idea as to what album we should add next, please leave a comment with your suggestion. The highest rated comment wins. But not a cookie. You just win. Anyway, that just about does it for this week's Music Nerd. If you want to continue nerding out musically, there are links to a few more stories in the description. The Prime Minister of Russia believes that Pussy Riot should be freed, so they might actually get out of prison sometime this year. We talked about the new iTunes in this Music Nerd, but not so much about how the iPhone 5 itself has implications for how you might make music on smartphones, so there's an article about that. And also, Psy has reached #1 on the iTunes chart in the US and all sorts of other countries, so if you want to check that out, that story's below also. Leave a comment, click the like button, subscribe to Fuse. Dan Brown out.